What happened when you showed up to your own funeral? The funeral director's clipboard trembled in his hands as he checked his watch for the third time in 2 minutes. 2:47 p.m. My service was supposed to start at 2:30, but apparently being dead doesn't guarantee punctuality from your mourners. I adjusted the black wig and oversized sunglasses, pulling my coat collar higher as I sat in the back row of Meadowbrook Chapel. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd picked this funeral home myself 3 months ago when my husband David suggested we update our wills. Just being practical, babe, he'd said, kissing my forehead. We're not getting any younger. What a thoughtful husband, planning ahead for my murder. The chapel smelled like lilies and hypocrisy. 47 people had shown up to say goodbye to Sarah Chin Morrison, loving wife, devoted friend, marketing executive at Henderson and Associates. If they only knew Sarah Chin Morrison was sitting 20 feet behind them, very much alive and seething with 8 weeks' worth of carefully contained rage. David sat in the front row, his shoulders shaking with what everyone assumed was grief. I knew better. Those weren't sobs, they were the same shoulder movements he made when he laughed at his own jokes. Next to him, Melissa dabbed her eyes with a tissue, playing the devastated best friend to perfection. Her black dress was new. I recognized it from the Nordstrom website, $340, purchased with a credit card linked to the bank account where my $750,000 life insurance payout had been deposited last Tuesday. The pastor cleared his throat and began the service I'd been unconscious for 8 weeks to attend. We gathered today to celebrate the life of Sarah Chin Morrison, taken from us too soon in a tragic hiking accident. Tragic. That's what they'd called it when David reported that I'd slipped on the wet rocks at Eagles Point Trail, fallen 60 feet into the ravine. What he hadn't mentioned in his tearful police statement was how he'd pushed me after I'd confronted him about the text messages I'd found on his phone. Messages like, can't wait until we don't have to sneak around anymore and the insurance money will set us up perfectly, and my personal favorite, she's so trusting, she'll never see it coming. He was right about that last part. I hadn't seen it coming until it was too late. But David had made one crucial mistake. He'd assumed the fall had killed me instantly. Instead, I'd landed on a ledge 30 feet down, unconscious but breathing. Park rangers found me 4 hours later during their search. By the time I woke up 3 weeks later in the ICU, David had already identified a Jane Doe's body as mine. Some poor woman with no family, similar build, found in the river downstream. The DNA test would prove him wrong eventually, but that would take time. Time I decided to use wisely. Detective Morrison, no relation, despite the shared surname, sat 3 rows behind David, exactly where I'd asked him to be. He caught my eye briefly and nodded. Everything was in place. The recorded conversations from David and Melissa's apartment, thanks to the spare key I'd kept. The financial records showing David's gambling debts. The life insurance application he'd secretly increased just 2 months before my accident. All of it would come out in exactly 13 minutes, according to the schedule I'd memorized. I checked my phone, 2:58 p.m. It was almost time for the dead to rise. The pastor droned on about my adventurous spirit and zest for life, clearly reading from generic funeral notes. I wondered if David had bothered to give him any real details about me, or if he'd been too busy calculating his windfall to care about authenticity. My phone buzzed with a text from Detective Morrison, * backup units in position. Judge signed warrant 20 minutes ago. You sure about the timing, *? I typed back quickly, * 3:15 p.m. exactly. During eulogies. Maximum impact, * 17 minutes to go. Melissa stood to approach the podium and my stomach clenched. She'd insisted on speaking at my funeral, my own best friend since freshman year at Stanford, where she'd helped me through organic chemistry and I'd talked her through her parents' divorce. We'd been each other's maid of honor. She'd held my hand in the hospital when I'd miscarried at 12 weeks, 3 years ago. The same hands that had helped David plan my murder. Sarah was like a sister to me, Melissa began, her voice breaking convincingly. We shared everything, our dreams, our fears, our secrets. Not quite everything, apparently. She'd failed to mention she was sharing my husband too. I keep thinking I'll get a text from her, asking if I want to grab lunch at that terrible sushi place she loved downtown. Yamamoto's, where the fish was questionable but the sake was cheap. A few people chuckled softly. It was a good detail, authentic enough that even I almost felt moved. We had spent countless Tuesday afternoons at Yamamoto's, splitting salmon rolls and gossiping about work. The last time we'd been there was 6 weeks before my death, when she'd seemed distracted, checking her phone constantly. Now I knew why. She'd been texting my husband. Sarah believed in second chances, Melissa continued. She always said people deserved forgiveness, that everyone was capable of change. The irony burned like acid in my throat. I'd given David a second chance after I'd found suspicious charges on our credit card 2 years ago, expensive dinners I hadn't attended, hotel rooms during work conferences I could never quite verify. When I confronted him, he'd sworn it was just work entertainment getting out of hand. Stressed about a promotion. Poor judgment, not poor character. I believed him because I'd wanted to. Because 8 years of marriage and the dream of starting a family together had seemed worth fighting for. She taught me that love means trusting completely, Melissa said, tears streaming down her cheeks. Real tears, which somehow made it worse. Sarah loved without reservation. She gave her whole heart to the people she cared about. Behind me, I heard my mother's quiet sob. Mom had flown in from Portland, staying with my sister Janet instead of David because he needs space to grieve. She'd called him yesterday. I'd been listening on the clone of his phone I'd set up during my weeks of evidence gathering, worried that he seemed to be handling things too well. Grief affects everyone differently, Mrs. Chen, David had told her. I'm just trying to be strong, like Sarah would want. My mother didn't know that David had been strong enough to book a vacation rental in Cabo for next weekend. A romantic getaway for 2, reservation made under Melissa's maiden name. 3:07 p.m. My hands were starting to shake, 8 weeks of suppressed emotion threatening to break through my carefully constructed calm. I practiced this moment hundreds of times in the mirror of my temporary apartment, the one I'd rented under my middle name with cash from the emergency fund David didn't know existed. In 8 minutes, I would stand up and destroy the lives of the 2 people who had destroyed mine. I just hoped I was strong enough to watch them burn. 3:09 p.m. Melissa finished her eulogy to scattered applause, dabbing her eyes one final time before returning to her seat next to my husband. David squeezed her hand, a gesture that would look like innocent comfort to everyone else, but I caught the way his thumb traced across her knuckles. The same way he used to touch me during movies, back when we were happy. Back when I thought we were happy. The pastor shuffled his notes. We'll now hear from Sarah's husband, David Morrison. This wasn't part of the plan I discussed with Detective Morrison. David was supposed to speak after my revelation, not before. My heart hammered against my ribs as he stood, adjusting his black tie, the Armani one I bought him for our 5th anniversary. Thank you all for being here, David began, his voice steady and clear. Too clear for a grieving widower. Sarah would have been overwhelmed by this turnout. She always underestimated how much people cared about her. He paused, scanning the room with practiced sorrow. His eyes swept past my row without recognition, but something made him linger. My pulse spiked. The wig was good, the glasses were oversized, but David had known my face for 8 years. Keep looking forward, I told myself. Don't move. My wife was trusting to a fault, he continued, and ice flooded my veins. Sometimes I worried she was too naive for this world. Too willing to believe the best in people, even when the evidence suggested otherwise. What was he doing? This felt like a message, but to whom? My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, I know you're here. My blood turned to concrete. Another buzz, asterisk back row, black coat, terrible wig. Really, Sarah? I expected better from someone who caught me cheating, asterisk. My hands trembling, I typed back, who is this? The response was immediate, asterisk your loving husband. Did you really think I wouldn't recognize the woman I've been married to for 8 years? You bite your left thumbnail when you're nervous. You're doing it right now, asterisk. I looked down. He was right. Asterisk nice try with the Jane Doe body switch. Very dramatic. But you made one mistake, you used our joint credit card to rent that apartment on Maple Street. I've been tracking your spending for 3 weeks, asterisk. The air in the chapel suddenly felt thin. This wasn't possible. I'd been so careful, planned everything perfectly. Check your email, came the next message. With shaking fingers, I opened my phone's email app. A new message from David's account, sent 2 minutes ago, asterisk evidence of insurance fraud attached. Amazing what a grieving widower discovers when he goes through his dead wife's things. Fake death certificate, falsified medical records, conspiracy with park rangers. The FBI is very interested in people who fake their own deaths to commit insurance fraud. Federal crime, sweetheart. 20 years minimum, asterisk. The attachments were perfectly forged documents that made it look like I had orchestrated my own fake death. Bank records showing payments to fictitious park rangers. A medical report claiming I had bribed hospital staff to alter my records. None of it was real, but it looked convincing. More convincing than my real evidence might seem now. My phone buzzed again, asterisk here's how this works. You're going to walk out of this chapel quietly and disappear. Forever. If I see you again, if you contact the police, if you breathe wrong, these documents go to the FBI and you spend the next 2 decades in federal prison. Oh, and your mom's house in Portland? Shame if something happened to that mortgage payment, asterisk. David was still speaking at the podium, but now I caught the slight smile playing at the corner of his mouth. Sarah always loved surprises, he said, looking directly at me. But she never was good at planning them. 3:13 p.m. In 2 minutes, Detective Morrison expected me to stand up and reveal myself. Instead, I was trapped, watching my carefully planned revenge crumble into checkmate. David had known I was alive. And he'd been planning for this moment longer than I had. The chapel walls felt like they were closing in as I stared at my phone screen, David's threats burning into my retinas. My carefully orchestrated plan was dissolving in real time, but something nagged at me. David was smart, but he wasn't this smart. The forged documents were too perfect, too professionally done for someone who could barely figure out our Netflix password. I looked up at the podium where my husband continued his performance. Sarah was always 3 steps ahead of everyone else. It's what made her such a brilliant marketing strategist. She could anticipate every move, counter every argument. That's when I noticed it, Melissa wasn't looking at David with adoring grief. She was checking her watch and scanning the exits. Her purse was clutched tightly in her lap, positioned for a quick departure. The body language was all wrong for someone mourning her best friend. My phone buzzed again, asterisk 30 seconds to decide, Sarah. Walk away or spend the next 20 years in federal prison, asterisk. But David had made his own mistake. He'd gotten cocky. I pulled up the audio recording app I'd been running since I entered the chapel and checked the file size. 43 minutes of clear audio, including his veiled threats from the podium and a timestamp proving he knew I was alive before I'd revealed myself. The same app that was simultaneously uploading to cloud storage and Detective Morrison's secure server. More importantly, I knew something David didn't. I typed back, check your email, darling. At the podium, I saw David's confidence flicker as he discreetly glanced at his phone. The message I'd just sent contained a single attachment, a photograph taken 15 minutes ago by Detective Morrison's partner, stationed across the street from the chapel. The photo showed Melissa loading 2 suitcases into a blue Honda Civic. The same car that was supposed to be in her driveway, because she'd told everyone she was too devastated to drive herself to the funeral. My dear friend Janet had offered to pick her up, but Melissa had insisted she needed to arrive early to prepare emotionally. Apparently her emotional preparation involved a getaway car. Keep checking your email, I sent. The next photo showed Melissa at an ATM 3 blocks away, 20 minutes before the service. The timestamp was clearly visible, along with the First National Bank logo. Detective Morrison's team had been tracking both of them since yesterday, not just monitoring, actively investigating. David's face had gone pale at the podium. He was trying to maintain his eulogy, but his hands were shaking now. Final attachment incoming, I typed. The last photo was beautiful in its clarity. Melissa and David, yesterday afternoon, loading hiking equipment into his truck. The same hiking equipment that was supposed to be evidence in my murder case, currently impounded at the police station. Except this equipment was brand new, tag still attached. Home Depot receipt clearly visible on the dashboard, dated 2 days ago. They'd been planning to plant additional evidence at Eagles Point Trail, probably my torn jacket or a piece of jewelry, to make the murder seem more convincing for the insurance investigation. Turns out I wasn't the only one planning surprises, I sent. Asterisk, but unlike you, I had federal agents helping me plan mine. Wire fraud across state lines makes this FBI jurisdiction. Thanks for threatening me in a recorded conversation while surrounded by witnesses. Asterisk. David's eulogy had devolved into stammering. Sarah, we were. Detective Morrison stood up from his seat and began walking toward the front of the chapel. I noticed for the first time that two other mourners near the exits were also rising, their movements coordinated and purposeful. Melissa bolted. She dropped her purse and ran for the side exit, but Agent Chen, my actual cousin from the Portland field office, who'd been instrumental in setting up this entire operation, was waiting for her. The tackle was swift and professional, Melissa's face hitting the chapel carpet with a satisfying thud. David tried to run too, but Detective Morrison was already at the podium. David Morrison, you're under arrest for attempted murder, conspiracy to commit fraud, and threatening a federal witness. The chapel erupted in chaos as I stood up and pulled off my wig. Hello, darling, I called out, my voice carrying over the gasps and shouts of my funeral guests. Miss me? The look on David's face was worth every sleepless night I'd spent planning this moment. Pure, unfiltered terror mixed with disbelief, like he was seeing a ghost, which, technically, he was. Sarah? My mother's voice cracked across the chapel. She was half standing, gripping the pew in front of her, her face cycling through confusion, hope, and dawning horror as she processed what was happening. Sarah, but how? I stepped into the aisle, my legs surprisingly steady despite 8 weeks of anticipating this moment. Hi, Mom. Sorry for the dramatic entrance, but some people needed to see this. Janet, my sister, was openly sobbing now, relief, I thought, though her expression suggested she was trying to calculate how much therapy this family gathering was going to require. Around the chapel, my coworkers, college friends, and extended family sat frozen in their pews like they were watching a movie they couldn't pause. Detective Morrison had David's hands behind his back, but my husband was still staring at me like I might disappear if he blinked. This is impossible, he kept repeating. The body, we identified the body. You identified what you wanted to see, I said, walking closer to the front of the chapel. Jennifer Walsh, 36 years old, found in the river 3 miles downstream from Eagles Point. No family, no one looking for her. The DNA test you kept pushing back? It would have proven she wasn't me. But you were so eager to cash in that life insurance policy, you never let it get that far. Melissa was screaming now as Agent Chen zip-tied her wrists. This is entrapment. We didn't do anything. Sarah's insane, she faked her own death. Actually, Detective Morrison said, pulling out his phone, let's see what you did do. He pressed play on an audio file, and David's voice filled the chapel, a recording from 6 days ago, captured by the wire I'd worn during my accidental encounter with him at our old coffee shop downtown. Asterisk, the bitch is definitely dead this time. Saw the coroner's report myself. 3 weeks in a coma, then lights out. Should have pushed her harder the first time, made sure she went all the way down. Asterisk. The chapel went dead silent except for my mother's sharp intake of breath. The recording continued. Melissa's voice now. Asterisk, what about the insurance investigation? They're asking questions about the policy increase. Asterisk. David again. Asterisk, let them ask. Grieving husband gets nervous about his wife's safety, bumps up her coverage. Happens all the time. By the time they figure out we pushed her, we'll be in Costa Rica. No extradition for murder there. Asterisk. I watched the color drain from every face in the room. My boss, Patricia Henderson, was staring at me with her mouth open. She'd given a lovely speech earlier about my dedication to the company and how I'd never miss an important deadline. I wondered what she thought about me missing my own death. The recording is from last Tuesday, I announced, my voice echoing off the chapel walls. Funny thing about being dead, people say the most interesting things when they think you can't hear them. David finally found his voice. You crazy bitch. You destroyed our lives for what? Some money? I destroyed your lives? The laugh that came out of me was sharp enough to cut glass. David, you threw me off a 60-foot cliff because you'd gambled away our savings and thought murder was easier than divorce. Agent Chen called out from where she was securing Melissa. We found the gambling debts, by the way. $240,000 to some very unpleasant people in Atlantic City. They were getting impatient about payment. You were supposed to die. Melissa shrieked, struggling against her restraints. Everything was perfect. You were supposed to stay dead. The chapel had become a crime scene, complete with stunned witnesses and federal agents, but I felt strangely calm for the first time in weeks. Sorry to disappoint you. But I've always been terrible at following other people's plans. Detective Morrison began reading David his rights as my phone buzzed with a text from the prosecutor. Asterisk, wire transfers to Costa Rican accounts confirmed. Flight tickets booked for tomorrow morning. We got them cold. Asterisk. 2 months of evidence gathering, 3 federal agencies, and 1 very dramatic funeral later, justice was finally being served. But as I looked around at the faces of my family and friends, shock, relief, confusion, and in some cases what looked like disappointment that the funeral was over, I realized the hardest part was just beginning. Being dead had been easier than coming back to life. Mom was the first to move, pushing past the chaos of federal agents and overturned programs to reach me. Her hand shook as she touched my face, like she was checking if I was real. 8 weeks, she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. I grieved you for 8 weeks. Do you have any idea what that did to me? To Janet? We planned your memorial service, we donated your clothes, I couldn't sleep in my own house because everything reminded me of you. The guilt hit me like a physical blow. In all my careful planning, I'd focused on punishing David and Melissa, but I hadn't fully considered the collateral damage. My family had genuinely mourned me while I'd been 3 miles away in a studio apartment, eating takeout and building my case. Mom, I'm so sorry, but I had to. Had to what? Let your mother think her daughter was dead? Let Janet blame herself for not visiting more often? She's been in therapy, Sarah. Grief counseling because she thought she failed you as a sister. Janet was still crying, but now I couldn't tell if they were tears of relief or anger. Probably both. Detective Morrison finished securing David and approached us. Ma'am, I know this is overwhelming, but we're going to need statements from everyone who was in contact with the deceased, with Sarah, during the time she was presumed dead. Statements? My boss Patricia finally found her voice. What kind of statements? We sent flowers to her apartment. We held a memorial service at the office. I personally wrote a letter of recommendation for her replacement. Are you telling me Sarah was alive during our staff meeting about her death benefits? The ripple effects were cascading faster than I'd anticipated. Death benefits, insurance paperwork, memorial donations. I'd been so focused on the criminal case that I hadn't thought about the administrative nightmare of resurrection. Agent Chen called out from across the chapel, "We're going to need to interview the funeral director too. Someone's been paying for this service, and it wasn't the deceased." Mr. Hendricks, the funeral director, looked like he was about to faint. "I don't understand. The payments came from the husband's account. The death certificate was filed with the county. This is highly irregular. I could lose my license over something like this." "You're not in trouble," I said quickly. "David used a forged death certificate. You had no way of knowing." But even as I said it, I could see the legal complications multiplying. How many documents had been filed in my name? How many people had acted on the assumption of my death? My car insurance had probably been cancelled. My credit cards closed. My apartment lease terminated. David's voice cut through my spiraling thoughts. "You want to know the real crime here? She's been stalking us for weeks. Breaking into our apartment, recording private conversations, identity theft to rent that apartment. We're the victims here." Detective Morrison looked at me with concern. "Sarah, please tell me you got proper warrants for those recordings." My stomach dropped. I used my spare key. "It's still legally my apartment too. My name is on the lease." "Not anymore, it isn't," David said with a bitter smile. "Had your name removed 6 weeks ago. Death certificate, remember? Everything you recorded in that apartment was obtained illegally." Agent Chen looked up sharply. "Is that true?" The chapel felt like it was spinning. 3 months of careful evidence gathering, and David might have just found a way to exclude the most damning recordings. Without those audio files of him and Melissa planning my murder, the case became much harder to prove. My phone rang, Detective Morrison's partner calling from downtown. He put it on speaker. "We've got a problem," came the voice through the chapel speakers. "The bank is disputing the insurance fraud charges. They're saying since Sarah Chin Morrison was declared legally dead by proper authorities, the payout was legitimate. They processed everything according to protocol." I felt the walls closing in again, but this time from a completely different direction. Coming back from the dead, apparently, was more complicated than dying. The prosecution's case was unraveling in real time, and I could see the satisfaction creeping back into David's face as he realized what was happening. But Agent Chen held up her hand, silencing the room. "Actually, Mr. Morrison, you made one critical error in your legal reasoning," she said, approaching the handcuffed David with a folder I hadn't seen before. "You're absolutely right that Sarah's recordings from your apartment might be inadmissible. But you forgot about the wire she wore during your coffee shop meeting." David's smugness faltered. "What wire?" "The one the FBI authorized after Sarah contacted us 4 weeks ago with preliminary evidence of insurance fraud." Agent Chen opened the folder and pulled out an official document. "Federal wiretap warrant, signed by Judge Patricia Holbrook on October 15th. Every conversation you had with Sarah or discussed her within 50 feet of her location has been legally recorded for the past month." The blood drained from David's face. "That's impossible. She was dead. Legally dead, yes. But federal agencies don't rely on local death certificates when investigating multi-state insurance fraud. We did our own verification." Agent Chen smiled coldly. "Took us about 6 hours to figure out the Jane Doe switch. We've been watching you both for 3 weeks." Detective Morrison's phone buzzed, and he glanced at the screen. "The Atlantic City investigation just wrapped up too. Vincent Torino sends his regards, David. Apparently he's very interested in discussing your outstanding debt now that he knows you've been playing dead man's poker with insurance money." I watched David's last bit of confidence crumble. Vincent Torino wasn't the kind of man who appreciated being lied to about available assets. Melissa, still zip-tied on the floor, tried one last desperate play. "Sarah's obviously unstable. She faked her own death. That's not the action of a sane person. Everything she's saying is delusional." "Ms. Gardner," Agent Chen said, pulling out her phone, "would you like to hear the recording from yesterday when you called the Costa Rican resort to confirm your honeymoon suite reservation? The one you booked under the name Mrs. Melissa Morrison?" The audio quality was crystal clear as Melissa's voice filled the chapel. "Yes, I'd like to confirm the Ocean View suite for November 8th. 2 guests, Mr. and Mrs. Morrison." "No, this is Mrs. Morrison." "Well, I will be after we get married next week." Asterisk. My mother made a sound like she'd been punched in the stomach. They were planning to get married? While we were still mourning Sarah? The wedding was scheduled for this Thursday, Detective Morrison confirmed, consulting his notes. Courthouse ceremony in Atlantic City. Very private affair. They'd already filed the paperwork. David listed himself as a widower, naturally. Janet finally spoke up, her voice shaking with rage. "You were going to marry her 4 days after Sarah's funeral?" 4 days? David's lawyer instincts kicked in one last time. "This is all circumstantial. Planning a future together isn't a crime. Grief makes people do irrational things. Like pushing your wife off a cliff?" I interrupted. "Because we have that on recording too, David. Remember yesterday when you met with Melissa at Riverside Park? You were worried the insurance investigator was asking too many questions about my injuries being consistent with an accidental fall." Agent Chen nodded and played another audio file. David's voice again, asterisk, "I should have made it look more like an accident. Pushing someone leaves different bruising patterns than a slip. If they exhume that Jane Doe body and do a proper autopsy comparison, asterisk." The chapel was so quiet I could hear the ventilation system humming. Even the federal agents looked uncomfortable with the casual way David discussed the mechanics of my attempted murder. Mr. Hendricks, the funeral director, raised a trembling hand. "Excuse me, but what exactly happens to the funeral expenses?" "The burial plot has been purchased, the flowers have been delivered, and frankly, this is the most irregular situation I've encountered in 37 years of service." "Send the bill to David," I said. "He's the one who insisted on the premium package with the mahogany casket and imported lilies. I would have gone with cremation." Detective Morrison's radio crackled to life. "Transport units are here for the suspects. ETA 5 minutes to processing. As if on cue, the chapel doors opened and 2 more federal agents entered, followed by what looked like half the local police department. The scene was becoming a three-ring circus, complete with photographers documenting evidence and witnesses giving impromptu statements to investigators. But something still bothered me. David was many things, unfaithful, greedy, murderous, but he wasn't usually this sloppy. The forged documents he'd threatened me with earlier had been too sophisticated, and his backup plans too elaborate for someone who forgot to research bruising patterns before committing attempted murder. I was missing something important. And I had the sinking feeling I was about to find out what. As the federal agents began processing the crime scene, I noticed something that made my blood freeze. Agent Chen was having a hushed conversation with Detective Morrison near the altar, and their body language screamed problem. When Chen glanced my way with what looked like pity, I knew my victory lap was about to become a crash landing. I approached them, dodging crime scene photographers and my still-sobbing relatives. What's wrong? You look like someone died. Again. Detective Morrison exchanged a look with Agent Chen before pulling out his phone. Sarah, we need to discuss something. The bank records we've been analyzing, there's an irregularity. What kind of irregularity? Agent Chen cleared her throat. The life insurance payout David received? It wasn't $750,000 like you thought. It was $1.2 million. Someone increased your policy again 3 weeks ago. After you were already declared dead. The chapel floor felt unstable beneath my feet. That's impossible. I've been monitoring all our accounts. There's no way David could. He couldn't, Detective Morrison interrupted. The increase was authorized by someone with power of attorney over your estate. Someone who had legal authority to make financial decisions on behalf of your beneficiaries. I stared at them, my mind racing through the possibilities. The only person with that authority would be, no. No, that's impossible. Agent Chen pulled up a document on her tablet and turned it toward me. The signature at the bottom made my knees buckle. Janet Chen, power of attorney, estate of Sarah Chen Morrison. My sister? The words came out as a whisper. Janet authorized the policy increase? Behind me, I heard my sister's voice, no longer crying. I'm sorry you had to find out this way, Sarah. But you were never supposed to come back. I spun around to find Janet standing calmly in the aisle, her grief-stricken expression replaced with something cold and calculating. The tears had stopped completely, and she was holding her phone in a way that suggested she'd been recording our conversation. Janet, what the hell are you talking about? David was supposed to kill you cleanly. One push, quick death, closed casket funeral. Instead, he botched it so badly that you survived and spent 2 months playing detective. She shook her head disapprovingly. Amateur hour. I had to clean up his mess. Detective Morrison stepped forward, his hand moving toward his weapon. Ma'am, I need you to put the phone down and step back. Janet laughed, a sound I'd never heard from my sister before. Oh, detective, you're thinking too small. You've been so focused on David and Melissa's little murder plot that you missed the real crime. Sarah, did you ever wonder how I afforded that house in Portland? The one Mom's been staying in? The one I bought 6 months ago with cash? My mouth went dry. Janet, you're scaring me. What are you talking about? Henderson and Associates has been embezzling client funds for 3 years. Your boss Patricia is looking at federal prison time for wire fraud, money laundering, and tax evasion. But she needed a fall guy, someone whose death would trigger an insurance payout large enough to replace the missing money and cover the legal fees. The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. You've been working with Patricia to frame me? Frame you? Sarah, you've been laundering money through your marketing campaigns for months. Every client invoice you processed, every vendor payment you approved, all part of Patricia's embezzlement scheme. The FBI forensic accountants will find your digital fingerprints all over $2.3 million in fraudulent transactions. Agent Chen was frantically typing on her phone, presumably calling for backup. Janet Chen, you're under arrest for conspiracy too. Actually, you're not arresting anyone else today, Janet interrupted, holding up her phone. This entire conversation has been live-streamed to a private server. If I don't check in every 30 minutes, the recording goes automatically to the Portland Tribune, the FBI Portland office, and Henderson and Associates' biggest client, the one whose pension fund is missing $800,000. Detective Morrison froze. What are you asking for? Simple. David and Melissa take the fall for Sarah's attempted murder. The insurance fraud charges disappear, grief-stricken husband cashes policy, not unreasonable. And Sarah gets to stay dead, officially this time. I stared at my sister who'd held me when I had nightmares, who'd taught me to drive, who'd been my maid of honor, and saw a stranger. Janet, this is insane. I'm your sister. You're a liability, Sarah. You always have been. Perfect grades, perfect job, perfect husband, until you weren't. When Patricia approached me about needing a patsy for the embezzlement, your name was the obvious choice. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, * exit through the back door now. Come alone. You have 2 minutes before this gets much worse *. The sender had included a photo, Mom, sitting in what looked like the back seat of a car, her hands zip-tied, her eyes wide with fear. The photo of my mother made my blood turn to ice water. Mom's terrified eyes stared back at me through the phone screen, and I could see the interior of what looked like a white van behind her. Someone had taken my mother while we were all focused on the chaos inside the chapel. Janet, I said, my voice barely controlled, where is Mom? My sister's expression didn't change. Safe. For now. But you need to understand something, Sarah, this was never just about David's gambling debts or Melissa's affair. This has been 3 years in the making. Agent Chen was speaking rapidly into her radio, calling for additional units, but I could see the calculation in her eyes. Whatever Janet had orchestrated, it was bigger than a simple insurance fraud case. Detective Morrison stepped closer to Janet, his hand still near his weapon. Ms. Chen, we can work this out. Just tell us where Mrs. Chen is located. 1247 Riverside Drive, apartment 3B, Janet said calmly. My associates are waiting there with very specific instructions. If I don't send an all-clear text every 30 minutes, or if any law enforcement approaches the building, Mom's situation becomes permanent. The chapel had gone completely silent except for the sound of crime scene photographers documenting evidence and David's labored breathing as he processed this new layer of betrayal. Even Melissa had stopped struggling against her restraints, apparently realizing that her problems had just become much smaller compared to whatever Janet had planned. What associates? I demanded. Janet, you work in accounting at a nonprofit. You don't have associates. Patricia Henderson has been very generous with her contacts over the years. Turns out when you're embezzling $2.3 million from client pension funds, you develop relationships with people who specialize in making problems disappear. Agent Chen looked up from her phone with alarm. The Portland office just confirmed Henderson and Associates was raided 2 hours ago. Patricia Henderson is in federal custody, and they've seized all company records going back 5 years. Janet's composure cracked slightly. That wasn't supposed to happen until tomorrow. Which means your timeline just moved up, Detective Morrison observed. What do you need, Janet? My sister pulled out a tablet and showed us a bank transfer screen. Sarah's life insurance payout gets transferred to this account within the next hour. David and Melissa confessed to attempted murder but claim it was a crime of passion, reduced charges, maybe 15 years instead of life. And Sarah disappears permanently. What about the embezzlement charges? Agent Chen asked. With Patricia in custody and Sarah officially dead, the missing pension money becomes Patricia's problem alone. The digital evidence pointing to Sarah becomes irrelevant. You can't prosecute a dead woman. I stared at the transfer screen, trying to process the numbers. Janet, that's not just my insurance money. You're transferring funds from 6 different accounts. Henderson and Associates client funds, mostly. Patricia was supposed to replace it all before the federal audit next month, but she got greedy. Started using the money for personal expenses, luxury purchases. I've been cleaning up her mess for months. Detective Morrison's radio crackled. Morrison, this is dispatch. We've got eyes on 1247, Riverside Drive. Confirming elderly Asian female in white van, 2 male suspects. Requesting permission to move in. Negative, Morrison responded immediately. Maintain surveillance only. Do not approach. Janet smiled for the first time since this nightmare began. Smart choice, Detective. My associates are former military contractors. They don't negotiate. My phone buzzed again. Another photo of Mom, this one showing a man in tactical gear sitting beside her. His face was obscured, but the message was clear. These people were professionals. 47 minutes until the next check-in, Janet announced, consulting her watch. And Sarah, just so we're clear, if you try to run, if you contact anyone outside this room, if you do anything except exactly what I tell you, Mom dies. Then I release the evidence about your involvement in the embezzlement, and you spend the rest of your life in federal prison for crimes you didn't even know you were committing. Agent Chen was typing furiously on her tablet. The bank transfer Janet's requesting requires multiple authorization codes. Sarah would have to personally approve it. Which I'm not doing, I said firmly. Janet, this is insane. You're talking about murder. About kidnapping our mother. This isn't you. You never knew who I was, Sarah. Perfect little Sarah with her perfect life and perfect husband. Do you know what it's like living in your shadow for 34 years? Watching you succeed at everything while I'm stuck doing bookkeeping for a charity that pays me $28,000 a year? The bitterness in her voice was raw and decades old. I'd never realized how deeply Janet resented me, how my achievements had been a source of pain instead of pride for my sister. So you decided to destroy my life? I decided to make your life useful for once. Patricia needed a fall guy, and you needed to learn some humility. It should have been simple. David kills you, insurance pays out, missing pension funds get replaced, everyone wins except you. My phone was buzzing with text messages, but Janet was watching me too closely for me to check them safely. Through the chapel windows, I could see more federal vehicles arriving outside. This was about to get much worse. The weight of Janet's betrayal was suffocating, but I forced myself to think clearly. 34 years of being sisters, and I'd never seen this coming. But something about her story wasn't adding up. Janet, I said, keeping my voice steady, if you've been planning this for 3 years, why didn't you just kill me yourself? Why involve David and Melissa at all? Because I needed witnesses to your marriage falling apart. Financial stress, David's gambling, your growing suspicion about the affair, it all had to look organic. A grieving husband cashing an insurance policy draws less scrutiny than a sister inheriting everything. Detective Morrison was coordinating quietly with his team, but I could see the frustration on his face. Every move they made put Mom in more danger. My phone buzzed again. This time I managed to glance at it, a message from an unknown number. Asterisk Sarah, this is Agent Rodriguez, tactical team. We have visual on your mother. She's unharmed but situation is volatile. Working on solution asterisk. Janet caught me looking at my phone. New messages? I hope you're not thinking of doing something stupid. Just checking the time, I lied. How much longer do I have to decide? 38 minutes until next check-in. But the bank transfer needs to be initiated in the next 15 minutes, or the account's locked until tomorrow. Agent Chen looked up from her tablet with something that might have been hope. Sarah, there's something you should know about those Henderson and Associates transactions Janet mentioned. We've been tracking them for 6 months as part of a separate investigation. Janet's face went pale. What investigation? Patricia Henderson wasn't embezzling alone. She was working with a network of accounting firms across 3 states, laundering money for organized crime families. The pension fund theft was just one piece of a $50 million operation. That's impossible, Janet stammered. I would have known. You did know, Agent Chen continued. Janet Chen, you've been flagged as a person of interest in the federal RICO investigation for the past 4 months. Every financial transaction you've made, every phone call, every email, we've been monitoring all of it. The color drained completely from Janet's face. No, that can't be right. Patricia said the federal attention was just routine auditing. Detective Morrison stepped closer to Janet, sensing her confusion. Patricia lied to you, Janet. She's been feeding you false information to keep you compliant. Those associates holding your mother? They're not working for Patricia. They're working for Vincent Torino's organization. My blood froze. The same Vincent Torino that David owed gambling debts to. This wasn't just about insurance money or embezzlement, this was about organized crime cleaning up loose ends. The men holding Mom, I said, the pieces clicking together, they're not following your orders, are they, Janet? My sister's hands were shaking now. Patricia said they were contractors. Professionals. I'm supposed to check in every 30 minutes. Agent Chen's radio crackled with an urgent transmission. Chen, this is Rodriguez. The suspects at Riverside Drive just received a phone call. They're moving your mother to a different location. We need to move now. Through the chapel windows, I could see tactical vehicles positioning themselves around the building. But I knew that by the time they reached Mom's location, it would be too late. Janet was crying now, the reality of her situation finally sinking in. They were never going to let any of us go, were they? Patricia, David, me, we're all just loose ends to them. Which means we need to work together, I said, grabbing my sister's arm. Janet, how are you supposed to contact these people? Encrypted messaging app on my phone. But Sarah, I don't think they're going to listen to me anymore. My phone buzzed with another message from Agent Rodriguez. Asterisk, we lost visual. Van is mobile. Need immediate tactical advantage or we lose her. Asterisk. 15 minutes until the bank transfer deadline, 36 minutes until Janet's next check-in, and somewhere in the city, professional killers were moving my mother to a location we'd never find. The next decision I made would determine whether anyone in my family survived this nightmare. I stared at Janet's phone, my mind racing through possibilities. The encrypted messaging app showed her last check-in was 43 minutes ago, with the next one due in 36 minutes. But there was something else in the message thread that caught my attention, timestamps that didn't match Janet's story. Janet, I said, scrolling through the messages, these conversations with your associates started 6 weeks ago. But you said Patricia only approached you about the embezzlement 3 years ago. My sister's face crumpled. The timeline got complicated. Agent Chen leaned over to read the phone screen. These messages aren't about pension fund theft. They're coordinating drug shipments through Henderson and Associates client accounts. Janet, you weren't helping Patricia embezzle, you were laundering money for a cocaine distribution network. The chapel spun around me. Cocaine? Janet, what the hell have you gotten involved in? It started small, she sobbed. Just moving some cash through the nonprofit's accounts. Patricia said it was tax optimization for wealthy clients. 20,000 here, 30,000 there. But then Vince and Torino's people wanted bigger transfers, and Patricia needed someone with access to multiple account systems. Detective Morrison grabbed the phone from my hands. These transaction records show $400,000 moved through 17 different accounts in the past month alone. Janet, you're not just an accessory to embezzlement, you're a key player in a major drug operation. Through the chapel windows, I could see Agent Rodriguez's tactical team preparing to move out. But my phone buzzed with a message that made my heart stop. Asterisk, Sarah, this is your mother. They're letting me send one message. The men say they know about David's gambling debts and Janet's drug money. They want $2.8 million total, insurance money plus what Janet owes them. You have 20 minutes, asterisk. I showed the message to Agent Chen. Mom's alive, but they've increased their demands. It's not just about the insurance anymore. Janet looked at the message and her face went white. 2.8 million? But I only moved 400,000 through the accounts. Where are they getting that number? Interest, Detective Morrison said grimly. At the rates these organizations charge for money laundering services, 400,000 becomes much more very quickly. Plus penalties for getting law enforcement involved. Agent Chen's radio crackled. Rodriguez to Chen. We've tracked the van to the Port Authority warehouse district. 3 buildings, multiple exit routes. If we move in blind, we'll lose them. My phone rang. Unknown number. Answer it, Agent Chen instructed. Speakerphone. I pressed accept. A man's voice, heavily accented, Miss Chen Morrison. Congratulations on your resurrection. Very dramatic. Where is my mother? Safe, for the next 18 minutes. You understand the terms? $2.8 million. But the insurance money is only $1.2 million. Your sister will provide the additional funds. She has access to accounts you don't know about. I looked at Janet, who was shaking her head frantically. I don't have access to anything else. The non-profit accounts only had the Henderson and Associates client escrow accounts. The voice interrupted, apparently hearing our conversation. Patricia Henderson gave your sister administrative access to 17 high-net-worth client portfolios. Janet has been our bank for 6 months. Agent Chen was typing rapidly on her tablet, pulling up federal banking records. Sarah, these aren't just pension funds. Janet's been moving money from trust funds, estate accounts, even children's college savings. We're talking about dozens of victims. I didn't know. Janet screamed. Patricia said they were just business accounts. Legitimate client funds. The voice on the phone chuckled. Ignorance is expensive, Miss Chen. 16 minutes now. Detective Morrison leaned toward the phone. This is Detective Morrison, Portland PD. We can negotiate a peaceful resolution. The line went dead. My phone immediately buzzed with a text message containing GPS coordinates and a photo of Mom sitting in what looked like a shipping container. The message read, Asterisk Port Authority, Building 7, Container 428B. Come alone. Bring Janet and the account passwords. No law enforcement or your mother's story ends badly, asterisk. Agent Chen checked her watch. 15 minutes to get across town in rush hour traffic. It's impossible. But I was already moving toward the chapel exit, Janet's phone clutched in my hand. Behind me, David's voice called out from his restraints, Sarah. They'll kill you all anyway. Don't do this. For once, my attempted murderer husband was probably giving me good advice. But I was done letting other people control my story. The tactical van screamed through downtown Portland, Agent Rodriguez driving while I sat in the passenger seat clutching Janet's phone. My sister was in the back, zip-tied but cooperative, her face streaked with tears and terror. 12 minutes, Rodriguez announced, taking a corner so fast the van tilted. Chen, we've got eyes on Building 7, but thermal imaging shows at least 6 heat signatures inside. Your mother's location is confirmed, but they've got professional security. I studied the encrypted messages on Janet's phone, trying to understand the scope of what she'd gotten involved in. The transaction record showed systematic transfers dating back 8 months, long before Patricia's arrest, longer than Janet had initially admitted. Janet, I said, turning to face my sister, these messages mention someone called the accountant. Who is that? She looked confused. I thought that was Patricia. She's the one who gave me the passwords, the account access codes. Agent Chen's voice crackled through the radio from her position at the chapel. Sarah, we just got Patricia Henderson's FBI interview transcript. She's never heard of your sister. Claims she's never seen these transaction records. My blood went cold. What are you saying? Janet wasn't working for Patricia Henderson. Someone else has been using Patricia's identity and Henderson and Associates as cover for a completely separate operation. I stared at Janet, who looked as shocked as I felt. If you weren't working with Patricia, who gave you the account access? David did, she whispered. 3 months ago, David said Patricia needed help with some client transfers. He said you were too busy with the marketing campaigns to handle the extra bookkeeping. The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. David hadn't just been planning to kill me for insurance money, he'd been using my sister to launder drug money through my company's client accounts. Every transaction Janet processed had been in my name, using my digital signatures that David had access to as my husband. Rodriguez, I said into the radio, David Morrison set this whole thing up. He's been using both my and Janet's identities to move money for Vincent Torino. That's why the gambling debts were so high, he wasn't losing money, he was cleaning it. Agent Rodriguez nodded grimly. And when the federal audit of Henderson and Associates was announced, he needed you dead before investigators could trace the transactions back to your login credentials. My phone buzzed with another message from Mom's captors, * Building 7, loading dock C. 2 minutes late means permanent consequences. Come now, *. We're 4 minutes out, Rodriguez said, pushing the van harder through traffic. Sarah, I need you to understand, these people aren't going to let any of you walk away. David's operation is worth millions to Torino's organization. Then what's the plan? We get your mother out alive. Everything else is secondary. Janet spoke up from the back seat, her voice barely audible. The account passwords they want, I changed them yesterday. After Patricia got arrested, I got scared and locked down everything I could access. I turned to stare at her. You what? The Henderson and Associates accounts, the client escrow funds, even the nonprofit accounts, I changed all the passwords and security questions yesterday morning. That's probably why they moved up their timeline. Agent Rodriguez hit the brakes hard as we approached the Port Authority. You're telling me they're holding your mother hostage for money they can't access? Not exactly, Janet said miserably. I wrote down all the new passwords. They're in my apartment safe, along with backup authentication codes for every account. If they force me to cooperate. Through the van's windshield, I could see Building 7, a massive concrete warehouse with loading docks stretching along the waterfront. At least 3 black SUVs were parked outside, and I counted 4 men in tactical gear positioned around the perimeter. Vincent Torino's people, Rodriguez confirmed, studying the scene through binoculars. Professional setup. They're expecting law enforcement. My phone rang. The same accented voice from before. Mr. Morrison. You're late. We're here. Building 7. Where's my mother? Loading dock C. Come alone with your sister. Any sign of federal agents, and we start sending pieces of your mother to different addresses. The line went dead. Agent Rodriguez checked his weapon and looked at me seriously. Sarah, once you go in there, we lose control of the situation. Are you absolutely sure about this? I looked at Janet, terrified and guilty but still my sister. I thought about Mom, probably convinced she was going to die because of our family's mistakes. I thought about David, still handcuffed back at the chapel, having orchestrated this entire nightmare while pretending to love me. I'm sure, I said. But I'm not going in defenseless. I held up Janet's phone, showing Rodriguez the encrypted messaging app. Janet, how long does it take to transfer money between these accounts? With the right passwords? About 90 seconds per transaction. I smiled for the first time in hours. Perfect. Because I've got a much better idea than giving Vincent Torino $2.8 million. I was about to teach some professional criminals what happens when they mess with a marketing executive who'd spent 8 weeks planning the perfect revenge. The loading dock of Building 7 smelled like diesel fuel and salt water. Janet and I approached Dock C with our hands visible, her phone clutched in my right palm. Through the massive open doorway, I could see Mom sitting on a metal chair, her hands zip-tied but otherwise unharmed. 2 men in tactical gear flanked her, assault rifles held casually but ready. A third man stepped out of the shadows, tall, well-dressed, probably in his 50s. Not what I'd expected from Vincent Torino's operation. Mr. Morrison, he said with a slight smile. I'm Marcus Webb, financial coordinator for Mr. Torino's organization. Your resurrection has caused considerable inconvenience. Where I come from, we call that attempted murder, I replied, keeping my voice steady. But let's talk about your inconvenience. Webb gestured toward Mom. Your mother is comfortable, as promised. But we have a schedule to maintain. Mr. Torino's clients expect their financial arrangements to proceed smoothly. Janet stepped forward, her voice shaking. I have the account passwords. Just, please don't hurt anyone else. Of course you do, Webb said. But first, let's clarify exactly what accounts we're discussing. Your husband was quite thorough in his record-keeping, Mr. Morrison. He pulled out a tablet and showed me a spreadsheet that made my stomach drop. Dozens of account numbers, transaction histories going back 10 months, and at the bottom, a running total that read $4.7 million. $4.7 million? I stared at the screen. David was laundering almost $5 million? Your husband was one of our most efficient contractors, Webb confirmed. Henderson and Associates provided excellent cover for moving funds through legitimate business accounts. Until the federal audit was announced, naturally. Mom's voice carried across the loading dock. Sarah, whatever David did, it wasn't your fault. Don't give him anything. One of the guards moved closer to Mom, and I saw her flinch. My hands clenched into fists. The money transfer, Webb continued, needs to happen within the next 8 minutes, or Mr. Torino's evening schedule becomes complicated. Your sister will access the accounts, you'll authorize the transfers, and everyone goes home safely. I looked at Janet, who was staring at the spreadsheet with horror. Sarah, I only knew about a fraction of this. David must have been using my access codes to process transactions I never saw. Which brings us to our current problem, Webb said. Yesterday's password changes have created an administrative nightmare. Mr. Torino's clients are expecting their funds to be available tonight. Behind Webb, I could see more movement in the warehouse, at least 6 additional men, all armed, all watching our conversation. But something felt off about their positioning. They weren't guarding exits, they were guarding something else inside the building. What else is in that warehouse? I asked. Webb's smile widened. Inventory. Mr. Torino's organization handles more than just financial services. But that's not your concern. My phone buzzed with a text from Agent Rodriguez. Asterisk thermal shows 12 hostiles plus your mother. Swap positioning but need distraction. Can you delay 3 minutes? Asterisk. 3 minutes. I could work with that. The account transfers, I said to Webb, they'll take time to process. Each one requires dual authentication, security verification. Even with Janet's passwords, we're looking at 20 minutes minimum. Webb checked his watch, irritation flashing across his face. That's unacceptable. Mr. Torino's clients. We'll have to wait, I interrupted. Unless you prefer to explain to the FBI why you're holding federal witnesses hostage at a crime scene? The sound of helicopters was getting closer, police or federal, I couldn't tell which. Webb heard it too, his expression shifting from irritation to concern. Change of plans, he announced to his team. We're moving to location B, prep the vehicles. But I wasn't finished with Marcus Webb yet. The helicopters were getting louder, but Marcus Webb wasn't running. Instead, he pulled out his own phone and made a call that chilled my blood. Location B is compromised, he said calmly. Initiate Protocol 7. Within seconds, I heard explosions in the distance, 3 distinct blasts from different directions across the port. Emergency sirens immediately began wailing, and the helicopter sounds shifted away from our building. Diversions, Webb explained casually. Mr. Torino's organization doesn't leave operational security to chance. Your federal friends are now responding to warehouse fires in 3 different locations. My phone showed no signal, they were jamming communications. Agent Rodriguez and his team had just lost contact with us completely. Janet was staring at her phone in panic. Sarah, the account access, it's not just about passwords. The banking system requires biometric confirmation for transfers over $50,000. Fingerprint scans tied to the original account holders. Webb's expression darkened. Explain. Henderson and Associates upgraded their security 3 weeks ago, Janet continued, her voice getting steadier as she realized something. Every client account requires the primary authorized user's physical presence for major transactions. David might have had my passwords, but he couldn't access the largest accounts without. Without what? Webb demanded. Without Sarah's fingerprints, Janet finished. She's the primary signatory on 17 of the biggest accounts. Has been for 2 years. I stared at my sister, understanding dawning. That's why David couldn't just kill me and disappear. He needed me alive long enough to access those accounts. But you were in a coma for 3 weeks, Webb said, consulting his tablet. How were transactions processed during that time? Janet's face went pale. They weren't. That's why the federal audit got moved up. Henderson and Associates couldn't explain why major client accounts had been frozen for almost a month. Webb was quiet for 30 seconds, processing this information. Around us, his men were becoming restless, checking weapons and scanning the warehouse entrances. This changes our timeline significantly, he finally said. Miss Chin Morrison, you're going to accompany us to a more secure location. Somewhere with proper banking facilities. I'm not going anywhere with you. Your mother's continued health suggests otherwise. Webb nodded to one of his men, who moved behind Mom's chair and placed a hand on her shoulder. Mr. Torino's clients in Miami are expecting their funds to be available by midnight Eastern Time. That gives us approximately 4 hours to reach a facility with the necessary biometric equipment. My mind was racing. 4 hours meant they were planning to transport us out of state. Once we left Portland, Agent Rodriguez and the federal team would lose any chance of tracking us. But Webb had made a crucial error in his planning. I held up Janet's phone, showing him the banking app she'd been using. Marcus, there's something you should know about those client accounts. Janet, show him the transaction log from yesterday. My sister's fingers trembled as she navigated to the account history. The screen showed a list of transfers, all processed at 11:47 p.m. the previous night. I transferred everything, Janet whispered. Every account David had access to. $4.7 million moved to a single holding account with new authorization requirements. Webb grabbed the phone, scanning the transaction details. What holding account? Where did you move the money? The FBI Victim Recovery Fund, I said, unable to suppress a smile. Janet called the federal hotline yesterday after Patricia's arrest. Every dollar David laundered is now in federal custody as evidence. The color drained from Webb's face. Around the warehouse, his men were getting radio calls that seemed to be delivering very bad news. You moved Mr. Torino's money into a federal evidence account? Actually, Mom's voice called out clearly, she moved it into an account that doesn't exist. Everyone turned to stare at my mother, who was smiling for the first time since this nightmare began. Webb, she continued, you might want to ask Janet what she really does for work. Because I don't think she's mentioned her second job. The warehouse went dead silent as Webb stared at my mother, clearly trying to process what she'd just said. I watched his face cycle through confusion, anger, and what looked like the beginning of real fear. What second job? Webb demanded. Mom's smile widened. Janet, why don't you tell Mr. Webb about your position with the Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network? My jaw dropped. Janet, my sister who worked for a nonprofit making $28,000 a year, was a federal agent? I've been undercover for 18 months, Janet said, her voice suddenly steady and professional. Fincy Yen has been tracking Vincent Torino's money laundering operations across 7 states. Every transaction I processed, every password David gave me, every account he thought I was accessing for him, it was all being monitored and recorded by federal agents. Webb's hand moved toward his weapon. That's impossible. We verified your background, your employment records. The nonprofit job is real, Janet continued. Perfect cover for accessing multiple financial institutions without raising suspicion. But the Henderson and Associates access David gave me? That was the break we'd been waiting for. A direct pipeline into Torino's entire West Coast operation. The explosions in the distance suddenly made sense. The warehouse fires, I said, understanding flooding through me. Those weren't diversions to pull agents away from us. SWAT teams hitting Torino's other operations simultaneously, Mom confirmed. Drug warehouses, money-counting facilities, safe houses. Janet's been feeding the FBI locations for months. Webb was shouting orders to his men, but half of them were already receiving conflicting reports on their radios. Through the warehouse windows, I could see federal vehicles surrounding the building, not rescue units, but a coordinated takedown that had been planned for weeks. My phone suddenly had signal again. A text from Agent Rodriguez, * building secured. All exits covered. Webb and his team have 30 seconds to surrender *. Marcus Webb, Janet called out, pulling an FBI badge from her jacket. You're under arrest for kidnapping, money laundering, and conspiracy to distribute controlled substances. The loading dock erupted in chaos as Webb's men realized they were surrounded. But instead of fighting, most of them were dropping their weapons and putting their hands up. Professional criminals, apparently, knew when they were beaten. Webb himself stood frozen, staring at the badge in Janet's hand. 18 months of federal surveillance. How much of our operation do you have? All of it, Detective Morrison's voice echoed through the warehouse as he entered with a SWAT team behind him. Bank records, communication intercepts, transaction logs, even audio recordings of your conversation with David Morrison from yesterday. As federal agents swarmed the building, I finally reached Mom and cut her zip ties with a tactical knife one of the agents handed me. She pulled me into the fiercest hug of my life. I'm so sorry we couldn't tell you, she whispered. Janet's been working this case since before David started laundering money. When he tried to kill you, it accelerated everything. You knew? This whole time, you knew Janet was FBI? Who do you think recommended her for the undercover assignment? Mom smiled. 40 years with the Portland Police Bureau has some advantages. I stared at my mother who I thought was a retired dispatch operator, and started laughing. The sound echoed off the warehouse walls as Marcus Webb was handcuffed and read his rights, as Vincent Torino's money laundering operation crumbled around us, as my attempted murder turned into the takedown of a multi-million-dollar criminal enterprise. So, I said to Janet as we watched Webb being loaded into a federal transport vehicle, when exactly were you planning to mention that you're a federal agent? After your funeral, she replied with a grin. I thought it would make a great resurrection gift. David Morrison got 25 years for attempted murder and money laundering. Melissa Gardner got 15 years for conspiracy. Vincent Torino's organization lost $12.3 million in assets and saw 47 arrests across 7 states. And I got my life back, along with a family full of federal agents I'd never known existed. Apparently, showing up to your own funeral is the perfect way to discover who your family really is.